Europe, 1943. The sky above northern France is a curtain of darkness. No moon, no stars, only the low hum of German engines gliding through the night. Luftwaffe crews fly confidently, their bombers heavy with explosives, their laughter echoing inside the cold metal fuselage. Below them, the coastline glows faintly, the strange skeletons of Allied radar towers jutting from the cliffs like lifeless steel giants. To many German pilots, they are a joke. Worthless towers, one says over the intercom. They can't even see us in the dark. But on the ground, inside a cramped British and American radar hut, a green screen flickers. A blip appears and then another. Voices call out coordinates. Somewhere above the channel, a P-61 Black Widow silently adjusts its course. Guided by invisible waves the Germans dismissed as useless. Seconds later, the laughter ends. A streak of cannon fire rips through the night sky. And in that instant, the hunters become the hunted. What began as an Allied weakness was about to turn the night sky into a deadly trap for the Luftwaffe. When the Second World War began in 1939, radar was still a word few soldiers understood. To the untrained eye, it looked like a collection of strange steel towers, humming wires and glowing screens that seemed closer to science fiction than warfare. But for Britain, standing alone after the fall of France, those towers would soon become the thin line between survival and destruction. The British called their early network chain home. It stretched along the southern coast of England, a silent shield that could detect incoming German aircraft long before they reached the island. Each tower sent out radio waves that bounced off distant planes, painting crude but life-saving images on cathode ray screens deep inside command bunkers. To the Luftwaffe, however, it looked unimpressive, primitive even. German intelligence knew of these structures but dismissed their effectiveness. They believed radar was too crude to track fast-moving bombers at long range, especially at night. At first, they were right, partly. Radar in 1940 was still limited. It could warn defenders of raids but couldn't guide fighters precisely. During the Blitz, German bombers struck British cities night after night. Searchlights swept the sky in vain, anti-aircraft guns thundered blindly, and fighter pilots climbed into blackness with only their instincts and the occasional glint of moonlight to guide them. Britain was surviving, not winning. And across the channel, German aircrews grew accustomed to the pattern. Drop bombs, turn home, and watch the flames rise. Many laughed at reports of radio detection towers. They believed British scientists had built an illusion, something that couldn't possibly turn the tide of war. But in secret laboratories, British engineers were already working to change that. At Bawdsey Manor on the Suffolk coast, scientists refined radar frequencies, shrinking bulky systems and improving their precision. Soon, the Royal Air Force could not only detect German bombers but also estimate altitude and direction, data that would later prove crucial for interception. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States watched carefully. American military scientists understood that radar could decide the next phase of modern war, and that they were already behind. By 1941, just before America's entry into the conflict, U.S. research centers like MIT's Radiation Laboratory were founded specifically to accelerate radar development. They began building smaller, more powerful magnetrons, the heart of radar transmission. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, one of the most haunting details was that radar had already seen them coming. An American radar operator at Opana Point detected the incoming formation, but mistook it for friendly aircraft. The technology had worked, but the system to trust it had not yet been built. That event changed everything. Within months, the United States poured unprecedented resources into radar research. Dozens of experimental stations were constructed. American and British engineers exchanged designs under a new, tightly guarded alliance. The cooperation produced dramatic results. Radar sets small enough to fit into aircraft, systems capable of tracking targets in real time, and networks that could link ground operators with fighter pilots in the air. Still, in 1942, the Germans maintained an advantage in night operations. Their bombers and night fighters dominated the skies over Europe. British and American crews flying night raids often never returned, shot down by unseen enemies. The Luftwaffe's own night defense network, built around the Kammhuber line, used radar and searchlights effectively to intercept Allied bombers. To the Germans, their radar was proof of superiority. They saw their system as organized, scientific, and far ahead of what the Allies could manage. And when they saw the tall, thin towers being built along English and later continental coasts, they mocked them as desperate measures, clumsy towers trying to mimic the precision of German engineering. They had no idea those towers were the beginning of something far greater, a seamless radar web that would soon cover the skies of Europe, feeding information to a new breed of American aircraft designed to fight in total darkness. And while German pilots still laughed, Allied engineers were quietly preparing the counterstroke, radar that could hunt back. Inside the dimly lit huts of Britain's radar stations, war looked nothing like the battlefield outside. There were no explosions, no gunfire, just the quiet hum of machines and the green pulse of cathode ray screens. Young women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, some barely in their 20s, sat before the displays. Their eyes darted between blips, voices calm yet urgent as they relayed bearing and distance to the fighter controllers. Each blip represented lives, friends, family, a city under threat. Every second mattered. They couldn't see the planes, couldn't hear the engines, yet they felt the war more intimately than most soldiers. Their weapon was precision. Their enemy, time. Operators would later describe the eerie intimacy of it all, watching dots merge and vanish, knowing that somewhere above, men were dying in the dark. One operator recalled, "When the screen cleared, you didn't cheer, you just exhaled." These unseen watchers became the nervous system of the Allied night war. Without them, even the most advanced aircraft would be blind, and yet, many never received recognition until long after the war ended. They were the eyes behind the towers the Germans mocked, anonymous, tireless, and unflinching. To the engineers, radar was not just science, it was alchemy. They worked in secrecy, racing to compress entire laboratories into airborne machines. In Britain, the Airborne Interception Radar, AI Makayer 4 and later Makayer 8, was their miracle. It used high-frequency microwaves pulsing faster and farther than anything before. But the real breakthrough came from an invention no larger than a coffee mug, the cavity magnetron. Developed by British physicists Henry Boot and John Randall, it generated powerful microwaves from a compact device in the missing piece that made airborne radar possible. When the Americans received the magnetron through the top-secret TIZARD mission, their scientists at MIT's Radiation Laboratory refined it into the SCR-720 system. Compact, accurate, and deadly reliable, it could fit inside a fighter's nose and detect enemy bombers miles away, even through cloud, darkness, or fog. For the first time, a pilot didn't need to see his target. The radar saw for him. The screen inside the cockpit displayed two glowing arcs, one for the target, one for the horizon. As the arcs converged, the pilot adjusted course. At 2,000 yards, the blip grew sharper, confirmation of range. Then came the moment of truth. The faint silhouette ahead. A quick burst from four 20mm cannons, and another German bomber vanished into black smoke. Radar had transformed night combat from chaos to choreography. Precise, silent, unstoppable. The Germans had their own radar, advanced, effective but flawed by pride. Their early systems, Freya and Würzburg, gave the Luftwaffe remarkable defensive capability. The Kammhuber line, named after General Joseph Kammhuber, stretched from Denmark to France, forming an elaborate belt of searchlights and radar sectors. Each sector, controlled by Himmelbett, a canopy bed, radar zones, could guide night fighters directly to Allied bombers. At its peak, it was a marvel of coordination. But it was also rigid. Each radar sector could only track one engagement at a time. As Allied raids grew larger and radar countermeasures like window, metallic chaff were introduced, the Kammhuber line began to break down. Still, early in the war, German confidence was unshakable. Their scientists underestimated Allied electronics and believed that American and British radar networks were clumsy imitations. Even when reports came in of German bombers being intercepted in pitch darkness, many Luftwaffe officers dismissed them as coincidence. They failed to realize that the same towers they once mocked had evolved. By late 1943, Allied radar coverage extended deep into continental Europe. Ground controllers could see enemy bombers almost as soon as they took off. And high above, American night fighters were waiting, silent, invisible predators guided by the very signals the Germans had laughed at. The Luftwaffe's arrogance, born from early success, became a blindfold. They had mastered the art of fighting what they could see, but not what they could not. And the Allies were now fighting in a realm the Germans no longer understood, a war of echoes and shadows. By the summer of 1944, the war in Europe had entered a new phase. The Allies had landed in Normandy, the Luftwaffe was bleeding, and yet the night skies over France and Germany remained deadly. The Germans still relied on darkness and their last refuge. Bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, and night fighters prowled the clouds, searching for opportunities amid the chaos. But that darkness no longer belonged to them. In airfields across England and the newly liberated French countryside, a new breed of American aircraft stood ready, the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Sleek, black, and menacing, it was unlike any fighter ever built, the first designed specifically for night combat. Its twin engines hummed with quiet menace, and at its heart sat the secret that would change the air war forever, the SCR-720 radar. This radar could detect a single aircraft miles away, even in complete blackness. The Black Widow's three-man crew, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, worked in harmony. The operator seated behind the pilot read the glowing screen, guiding their approach with steady precision. Target, bearing 230. Range closing. A turn of the yoke, a soft bank into darkness. Range 2,000 yards. Target descending. Then silence, the eerie kind that comes before a kill. The first confirmed radar-assisted night victory came in July 1944. Captain John S. Chambers and radar operator, Lieutenant Bruce Cunningham of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, intercepted a German Ju-88 bomber over Normandy. The radar tracked it perfectly. The pilots never saw it with their eyes until they were within firing range. A burst of cannon fire lit the sky, and the Ju-88 disintegrated. The event sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe's Night Operations Command. Intercept reports were filled with disbelief. Enemy aircraft appearing from nowhere. Unseen approaches. Impossible evasion. But it was not luck. It was science, matured into precision killing. By mid-1944, radar had become the invisible infrastructure of Allied air power. Ground-based radar stations, mobile units, and airborne systems all worked in unison. The British Ground-Controlled Interception, GCI stations, provided the first vector, detecting German aircraft as they crossed the Rhine or took off from occupied airfields. Then control passed to airborne radar crews who closed the distance. In the operations room, the scene resembled a symphony of discipline. Dozens of controllers tracked enemy formations across plotting tables. Chalk lines marked predicted paths. Telephones and radios linked every radar station to the squadrons in flight. When a German aircraft was detected, the order moved instantly. Black Widow 4-1, Bandit inbound. Angels 8 heading 180. The radar operator acknowledged, eyes fixed on the glowing trace before him. Each heartbeat of the scope brought them closer to the target, a ghost chasing another ghost through the clouds. The Germans tried everything to break the pattern. They flew lower, hugged valleys, even shut off their own radar to avoid detection, but the Allies' network was too vast, too adaptive. With each new German tactic, Allied radar frequencies were adjusted, algorithms refined, and coordination tightened. Even the once mighty Kammhuber line was now turned against its creators. Allied intelligence used captured data and signals intercepts to map the exact radar frequencies of German defenses. They began jamming Würzburg and Freya systems, blinding the Luftwaffe's night eyes while their own remained sharp. For German bomber crews, the transformation was psychological torture. The night, once their shield, had become a trap. They could not see the enemy, hear him, or even predict when he would strike. The first warning came from tracers slicing through the dark. The laughter that once greeted Allied radar towers was now replaced by radio calls of panic. Enemy above. Can't see him. He's on us. In just a few months, Allied night fighters achieved what daylight raids never could: total dominance of the unseen battlefield. The success of radar-equipped aircraft reshaped Allied air tactics overnight. Fighter squadrons that once served defensive roles now became offensive hunters. sweeping across occupied territory in the dead of night. The U.S. 9th Air Force and Royal Air Force night squadrons coordinated joint missions, British Mosquitoes, using AI Mk-8 radar and American P-61s with SCR-720 working side by side. Each sortie began the same way. A GCI radar operator on the ground picked up a formation of German aircraft. Orders were relayed to airborne units who intercepted them before they reached their targets. Within minutes, one radar blip would vanish, then another, erased by a calculated burst of gunfire. Radar did not just locate the enemy. It dictated the rhythm of battle. It told pilots when to climb, when to dive, when to hold fire. It made the unpredictable predictable. And for the first time in history, it made the night a domain of control rather than fear. By autumn of 1944, reports from Luftwaffe headquarters in Bonn painted a grim picture. Losses among night bomber units had risen by nearly 60%. Crews refused to fly without fighter escorts, but even the escorts were being destroyed by radar-guided interceptors. The once dreaded German night fighters, Bf-110s and Ju-88Gs, were now being hunted themselves. Radar had quietly rewritten the rules of air warfare. The Germans realized too late that they were no longer fighting pilots. They were fighting a network, and that network never slept. By early 1945, Germany's night war was collapsing. The once proud Nachtjagd, the Luftwaffe's night fighter arm, was no longer a force of hunters but of survivors. The P-61 Black Widow, the RAF's Mosquito NF, and a vast radar web now ruled the European night. Each evening, as the cities of the Reich disappeared under blackouts, new signals flickered across Allied radar screens. Controllers marked them with grease pencils, bandits, inbound from Frankfurt, unknowns over the Ruhr. Within seconds, interceptors were in motion. At airfields from Belgium to East Anglia, the night fighters roared into the cold, black air. The SCR-720 radar came alive in their noses, sweeping the heavens in silence. The radar operator's voice guided the pilot as though reading from a script written in green light. Contact. Bearing 270, range 7,000. Closing fast. Every mission was a race against invisibility, but this time the advantage belonged to the Allies. When German pilots climbed to bombing altitude, believing they were unseen, they unknowingly stepped into radar cones already watching them. What had once been an invisible sanctuary had turned into an open arena of death. The first to fall were the Ju-188s and He-177s, lumbering bombers trying to strike. Allied bridgeheads and fuel depots, the P-61s hunted them relentlessly. From the Ardennes to the Rhine, the night was filled with sudden flashes of gunfire and brief, fiery falls from the clouds. The psychological toll on German air crews was devastating. Pilots reported hearing strange radio echoes, ghost signals that hinted they were being tracked. Many cut power to their own radar to avoid detection, rendering themselves completely blind. Others dropped altitude, flying dangerously low to escape, only to crash into unseen terrain or anti-aircraft fire. The Germans had once mocked the Allied radar towers as useless. Now they prayed their own systems could last one more mission. In theory, Germany's radar defense still existed, Freya, Würzburg, and the famous Kammhuber line. But in practice, it was gone. Allied electronic warfare had evolved into something. The Germans could no longer counter British. Bombers now carried window, thousands of aluminum strips that reflected radar, signals, and created ghost aircraft on German screens. The Luftwaffe's once coordinated defenses were overwhelmed by phantom formations. Radar operators screamed into telephones, unable to distinguish real from fake. At the same time, American and British radar jammers filled the airwaves with noise. Entire sectors of German radar went blind. Ground controllers could only listen helplessly as their pilots flew into the dark, uncoordinated and alone. When the P-61s entered these blacked-out zones, the effect was devastating. The Germans were deaf and blind. The Americans could see everything. The hunters of the night were being systematically erased. In March 1945, near the city of Mannheim, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron intercepted a formation of Ju-88 night bombers. Allied ground radar tracked them from takeoff. Within 20 minutes, every one of the German bombers had been destroyed. None ever saw their attackers. The operation was a perfect demonstration of radar coordination between ground and air. a level of precision unimaginable just a year earlier. Radar had turned warfare into geometry. Every flight path, every altitude, every engagement now unfolded according to unseen calculations. As the Allies crossed the Rhine and advanced into Germany, the night fighters followed. Mobile radar trucks rolled behind the infantry, erecting new towers on captured ground. Within hours, they were scanning the skies again, tightening the noose on any Luftwaffe unit that dared to rise. The Black Widows patrolled over Cologne, Kassel, and the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heart of Germany, destroying the last remnants of the Luftwaffe's bomber command. Some missions turned surreal, radar operators detecting aircraft miles ahead, only to discover on approach that the German crews had bailed out mid-air, abandoning their planes before being attacked. Even elite German night fighter units, such as those flying the advanced Heinkel He-219 Uhu with its own radar, found themselves outmatched. Their sets, though sophisticated, were plagued by shortages, maintenance failures, and Allied jamming. The He-219's radar range was barely half that of the American SCR-720. The advantage the Luftwaffe once held in electronics was gone. By April 1945, reports from the Luftwaffe's General der Nachtjagd painted a hopeless picture. Over 70% of operational radar sites were destroyed or jammed. Night fighter losses exceeded replacement rates threefold. Morale had collapsed. Crews still took off, out of duty, habit or desperation, but most never returned. The skies belonged to the Allies, and the towers the Germans had once ridiculed now watched over a dying empire. The final confirmed radar-guided kill of the European war came on the night of May 2, 1945. A P-61 Lady in the Dark from the 548th Night Fighter Squadron intercepted a lone Japanese Nakajima Kai-44 over Okinawa, but its European counterpart had already written history. The age of night blindness in warfare was over. In Europe, the last Luftwaffe missions ended not with explosions but silence. Planes landing on empty airfields, their crews exhausted, their radars dark. When American troops overran German radar sites, they found technicians still inside, staring blankly at glowing screens that no longer showed anything. The war of light and shadow had ended. The Allies had conquered the night. The towers still stood, their antennas turning slowly in the wind. The machines were silent, but their victory was written across the empty sky. When the war finally ended in May 1945, the ruins of Germany told a silent story, not just of bombs and armies, but of signals, frequencies, and unseen battles fought in the dark. The Allies had not only defeated the Luftwaffe in the skies, they had dismantled its ability to fight at night, to even see. By the spring of 1945, radar had become the unseen front line of victory. Across Western Europe, Allied air commands compiled staggering reports. Between July 1944 and April 1945, more than 2,500 German aircraft were confirmed destroyed in radar-guided interceptions. Night fighter losses were catastrophic. Squadrons that once prided themselves on precision were reduced to fragments. The 422nd and 425th Night fighter squadrons of the U.S. Army Air Forces alone claimed nearly 130 confirmed victories in under a year, a remarkable achievement considering they operated in near-total darkness. The RAF's Mosquito squadrons added hundreds more. German records, captured after the war, confirmed what Allied intelligence had suspected. The Luftwaffe's night defense had collapsed not because of courage or morale, but because of blindness. Radar jamming, signal deception, and relentless night interception had broken the backbone of Germany's aerial strategy. The once feared Kammhuber line, stretching from Denmark to the Alps, was now nothing more than a ghost on paper. Its radar stations lay in ruins, overrun or abandoned. Many towers had been bombed by daylight raids. Others were dismantled by retreating German engineers to prevent capture. But even where the antennas still stood, the operators inside knew their work was meaningless. Their radar screens, once alive with data, now showed only the echoes of Allied dominance. The radar war had reshaped the very concept of air power. What began as a desperate experiment, lines of crude steel towers on Britain's coast, had evolved into a fully integrated combat system linking land, air, and technology. For the Allies, it was a revolution. Commanders could now make decisions based on real-time data rather than guesswork. Fighter controllers no longer relied on weather or luck. They had vision through the clouds. Air campaigns became operations of mathematics, vectors, ranges, timings. The fog of war had thinned, if not vanished. In the final months of the war, this mastery of electronic warfare expanded far beyond Europe. Radar networks guided naval convoys across the Pacific, protected bomber formations over Japan, and coordinated amphibious assaults from Normandy to Okinawa. The lessons learned from the radar battles of Europe were already shaping a new kind of global strategy. Germany, meanwhile, entered the post-war era in technological shock. For years, the Reich had boasted of its engineering superiority, jet engines, rockets, precision optics, yet it had underestimated the quiet power of Allied science. The radar towers they had mocked became monuments to their own miscalculation. Captured German scientists later admitted how deeply the Allies' radar had confounded them. They had assumed radar could only serve as a defensive tool, never imagining it could be used offensively, mounted on fighters that hunted in darkness. The irony was brutal. The very arrogance that led the Luftwaffe to dismiss radar became the reason it could not survive it. In the chaos of post-war reconstruction, few spoke of the men and women who fought the radar war. The operators who watched green screens for endless hours, the engineers who risked their lives setting up mobile radar units near the front, and the pilots who trusted those invisible signals more than their own eyes. Many of them never knew the full scale of what they had achieved. They had not stormed beaches or flown daylight raids. Their victories came in silence, in the brief flicker of a blip that vanished, marking another enemy gone. And yet, historians would later call them the guardians of the night, the unseen force that turned the tide of air warfare. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, a new kind of war began, one not fought with tanks or rifles, but with signals, frequencies, and invisible waves. The lessons learned in the radar duels over Europe became the blueprint for the next half-century of global strategy. Allied engineers and intelligence officers wasted no time. Radar, once a top-secret wartime advantage, became the foundation of modern defense. In Britain, the once crude chain home stations evolved into an intricate network known as the rotor system, a post-war shield designed to detect Soviet bombers crossing the Arctic routes. Across the Atlantic, the United States built upon the British model. In 1954, the first lines of what would become the DEW line, Distant Early Warning System, were laid out across the Arctic Circle, radar stations stretching from Alaska to Greenland, designed to give the West precious minutes of warning in the event of a Soviet nuclear strike. These networks were direct, descendants of the technology born in the dark days of 1940, when a handful of engineers had argued that radio waves could save a nation. What began as a desperate experiment became the nervous system of a new global order. Germany's wartime radar sites, meanwhile, became laboratories for the victors. Allied scientists dismantled, studied, and often replicated the remains of German systems like Freya, Würzburg, and Mammoth. Ironically, the Germans' advanced radar technology, which they had never fully mastered in combat, helped accelerate Allied research in the post-war years. By the 1950s, radar had evolved from a wartime secret into a tool of civilization, guiding aircraft through fog, tracking weather systems, even helping astronomers measure the distance to the moon. Yet behind every civilian breakthrough was a military heart and a reminder that these signals were first born to hunt, the dawn of electronic warfare, the radar. War had also planted the seed for something far more complex: electronic warfare. During World War II, British and American scientists had already begun to explore countermeasures: radar jamming, spoofing, and decoys. The famous window, or chaff, strips of aluminum dropped from bombers to confuse German radar, had proven devastatingly effective. In the post-war years, that concept evolved into a new arms race, one waged not with bullets but with electrons. Every radar beam now had an enemy: the jammer, the signal deceiver, the stealth aircraft. Nations invested heavily in ways to see and not be seen. The concept of the invisible bomber, once science fiction, became a real strategic goal. American engineers working at secret sites like Groom Lake, later known as Area 51, began experimenting with radar-absorbent materials and aircraft designs that reflected signals away from detectors. Decades later, those experiments would culminate in the F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, a direct descendant of the lessons learned when radar ruled the skies of Europe. Radar had started as a guardian. It had become a gatekeeper of the modern battlefield. Whoever controlled the electromagnetic spectrum would control the war itself. While fighter aces and generals became legends, the radar operators remained shadows in history. They were mathematicians, engineers, and young men and women trained to read the ghostly flickers of cathode ray screens. In small huts from Dover to Okinawa, they fought battles without ever firing a shot. Their weapons were calculations, their victories silent. Many of them later recalled how radar had changed not just warfare but their very sense of perception. "You stopped trusting your eyes," one operator said years later. "You trusted the wave." Their contribution was finally recognized decades after the war. Memorials in Britain and the United States now honor radar pioneers and operators, acknowledging that without their vigilance, the night skies of 1940-45 might have belonged to the enemy. By the end of the 20th century, radar's influence had seeped into every aspect of life: air traffic control, weather forecasting, maritime navigation, even the search for distant planets. All trace their origins back to those experimental towers that once dotted the English coast. But its greatest legacy remained strategic. The concept of situational awareness, knowing what lies beyond the horizon, became the holy grail of modern warfare. From AWACS planes orbiting the Persian Gulf to missile defense systems tracking targets across continents, radar remained the silent sentinel of the modern world. In a sense, the radar war never truly ended. It evolved, from analog waves to digital scans, from green screens to quantum sensors. But the principle remained unchanged. In war, knowledge in the end, the radar towers that once guarded Britain and guided American pilots were dismantled, their metal frames rusting in forgotten fields. Yet their legacy hums on in every satellite, every jet, every ship that crosses the sea. Those who mocked radar in the early years of the war could never have imagined that the same invisible waves would one day circle the entire globe, guarding nations and shaping the balance of power. The story of radar is not just the tale of a machine. It's the story of humanity's relentless quest to see the unseen, the war in the dark. Skies over Europe proved one timeless truth. In every battle, the side that can see first wins. The night sky is quiet now. The radar towers that once pulsed with life stand abandoned, their steel skeletons outlined against the dawn. The green glow of cathode screens has faded. The echoes have fallen silent, but their invisible heartbeat still surrounds us, carried in every signal that circles the earth. In the vast story of World War II, radar was never glamorous. It had no face, no roar, no battlefield glory. Yet it changed everything. It turned fear into foresight, chaos into coordination, and darkness into light. The men and women who stood before those flickering screens didn't know they were shaping the future. They were just doing their duty, scanning the void, calling out bearings, saving lives one blip at a time. But in their quiet watchfulness, they gave birth to a revolution. When the war ended, radar didn't fade into memory. It became the nervous system of a new world, guiding airliners across oceans, forecasting storms, mapping distant worlds. What began as a desperate wartime invention became humanity's constant companion, watching, warning, protecting. And for the German pilots who once laughed at those strange towers on the cliffs, their mockery became a lesson written in fire. They had underestimated the power of human imagination. Radar was never just about seeing the enemy. It was about believing that even in the darkest night, knowledge could be light. Today, every aircraft that lands safely, every ship that finds its way home, every storm we track before it strikes, all owe something to those early days, to those invisible waves, and to the quiet people who learned how to listen to them. The war in the dark skies of Europe ended long ago, but the echo of radar, the hum of unseen vigilance, still travels endlessly through the air. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't just in the battles fought. It was in the light we learned to find in the dark.